This week, in lieu of a main talk, we are going to be hosting a panel discussion. The discussion is entitled, My Experience Attending a Religious Private School. So these are going to be Oasians who have attended religious private schools anywhere from pre-K all the way up and through college. Let me introduce our panelists real quick. Of course, we have Laura and Sam Whittington, Gene Hurst, Brian Schrock, and C.B. Forbes are going to be our panelists. Let's welcome them up. All right, so here's how this is going to work. It's going to be an open Q&A session. I'll go ahead and start us off with the first question. Maybe everybody can answer it left to right, right to left, however you guys want to do it. And then we'll open it up for anyone. If you've got a question, just raise your hand, and I'll be walking around the room with a mic. So, first question, why don't you guys tell us how you ended up in religious private school? Go.
Hey, everyone. Around my high school years is kind of the time where I started questioning a lot of things about my faith. But of course, when you're a senior in high school, you're already starting to be pressured into picking a place to go. And my family kind of gave me this encouragement to maybe try out the local Nazarene college, because we were a Nazarene family, went to a Nazarene church. And one of those is Olivet Nazarene University in the Chicago area. And, I didn't know much about the difference between religious colleges, public colleges. I just assumed it would be like going to regular college, but with maybe some more churchy stuff going on. Of course, it was definitely more different than I could have imagined, but I'll let everybody else expand too.
So I went to religious schools from first grade through 12th grade. My parents and all of my extended family were very what they call plain Mennonites in Pennsylvania, and they are very much a closed culture. It's very much an others, us and others, and you don't have any, like, the others are suspect. They're, they'll contaminate you. So pretty much all the children of this style of religion are educated in their Mennonite schools. So I really didn't have any choices.
I went to Christian schools from elementary, middle, and halfway through high school. And that was mostly because my parents are not fundamentalist religious. I mean, they're like most of America. If you ask them what they are, they'd say Christian, but they wouldn't tell you couldn't tell you where they go to church. But they were more concerned about my brother and I's academic success, so they sought out what they perceived to be preparatory academies, which in large part they were, but a few of them, and the three different schools I went to had varying levels of fundamentalism. But when my parents decided that I was being sort of neglected in my elementary school years, they sought out private schools, and of course private schools that you can get a scholarship to, and also would be accepting of us, were mostly the Christian variety, and they kept me in there until about halfway through high school, when I just decided to transition back to public school at that time.
I attended. Is this on? I grew up outside of Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia. If you've ever flown into Dulles Airport, you've probably flown over my childhood home. And I attended public schools from kindergarten until 10th grade. But in the 1990s, the area where I lived experienced a huge population boom. And my parents felt, again, that I wasn't getting enough attention in my high school due to overcrowding. We didn't have enough desks in one of my classrooms, so there were kids like sitting at the computer stations or just at a chair where they could find somewhere to write. And my parents decided to send me to a private school, and again, the one that was more affordable. And that where I already knew some kids who attended because they went to church with my family, was a fundamentalist, non-denominational Christian school where I went to 11th and 12th grade.
Hello, I grew up in the Church of Christ. For anyone who knows it, that's not United Church of Christ, that's the Fundamentalist Church of Christ. And in my family, my grandmother had 7 siblings. All of their children attended a school called Abilene Christian, at the time Abilene Christian College. And when I came of age and wanted to go to college, I picked a school in East Texas. They had a good journalism program, which is what I wanted to be. And I was told, no, you will either get drafted and go in the military and probably go to Korea. This was when Korea was very active. Or you will go to Abilene Christian. And so I reluctantly trundled off to 4 excruciatingly miserable years at a place called Abilene Christian, which is a fine school if this Christian thing doesn't get in your way.
Questions from the audience? Raise your hand. Okay.
For those of you who went to high school, did you guys deal with corporal punishment, and how did that scar your experience, or do you have any recurring effect from that?
Did you hear the question?
I heard something about corporal punishment.
Yeah.
I think theoretically at the elementary school I went to, they were allowed to, but of all of my Christian school experiences, my elementary years were probably the most benign. I mean, it was like any other elementary school except substitute your secular, regular sort of Western European fairy tales with biblical fairy tales, and you've got it. As soon as I got to middle and high, though, middle school especially, they did like to threaten the paddle from time to time. I never experienced it myself personally, but it was pretty extreme in some cases. I seem to recall a few times where they did have students. The whole school was sort of built around a central gym area, so all the classes sort of looked in on this gym slash like general space area, and they would have students who were getting pops. They called them pops. Go in there, and it would be like sort of a public shaming slash corporal punishment. And I can't, like, it affects me empathetically. I can't even imagine how those people now in their adult life sort of look back on that experience and, do they think they deserve that level of punishment, or do they think that was extreme? I couldn't answer for them, but I always thought that was pretty extreme. That sort of marks one of the first little like nails in my religious coffin of just like, that didn't seem right to me at the time, although, you could have asked me and I probably would have told you I was convinced it was right. But that was one of the little things that just made me think, like, that doesn't seem like a very appropriate way to handle a situation like that. So, but I still think about that from time to time, and it affects me, so.
They definitely had corporal punishment in the schools that I went to. I think as like a first or second grader, I do remember a teacher whacking me on the knuckles with a ruler because I talked too much, and that didn't do any good, obviously. And I do know that in the high school they had corporal punishment, but I graduated in the mid-'80s, and kind of it went the way of general public opinion about corporal punishment. I think the further it went down the line, the less and less you saw it, because more parents started saying, I'm not okay with somebody else, hitting my child with a piece of wood. But I know that it was also, like Sam said, they would pull kids out in front of, like, to make sure they made a really good example of them, which, yeah.
Okay. I even in public school, we had corporal punishment for sure. But my question is, since you went to parochial schools, what percentage of your curriculum was taken up with actual religious instruction? And that's for each of you.
I'm going to guess. We had one, I went to high school, we had your standard 7-period day. The first period of every single day for me in 11th and 12th grade was dedicated to a religious Sunday school, basically. And then throughout the rest of the day, I think really the only place I didn't see it crammed into every crevice it could fit in every subject was my math classes. But in English, we read literature that had Christian themes. We even diagrammed sentences that were about the apostles. There was a big stink when I took earth sciences in 11th grade. The woman who taught our class, she wasn't a career teacher, she was actually a geologist. And she had a child that went to the school. And usually in that point in your education in the state of Virginia, you talked about how the earth was created or came to be. And her approach was she laid out the different points of view, young earth creationism, old earth creationism, evolution with divine guidance. I think those were our three options. We had to pick one and defend it both biblically and scientifically. And the school board had a big issue with her even suggesting that evolution could exist but with some sort of divine influence. We eventually got to do the assignment, but without like much gnashing of teeth. And let's see, I think, every class I attended, there was some religious aspect to it. The course I had to take in 11th grade was called Understanding the Times. It came with a book that was about this thick. And it basically laid out, we discussed how the only acceptable society to live in was a capitalist Christian society. And we discussed the problems with Marxism and with socialism and with secular humanism and how they were all ultimately flawed. We watched videos about gay people who had been, gone through some sort of therapy and made to see the error of their ways and talking about how it ultimately destroyed their life. And I gotta say, this class was ultimately what led to me becoming an atheist. It was because once I graduated and I went to college and I met people who, it was mainly having friends that were gay made me think, oh, I was lied to about this. This is not what it's like at all. What else did they lie to me about? And so in some ways it was good, I guess. I might still be religious if I hadn't gone to religious school, but
I would say that was very similar in my experience, like everything, because especially in the fundamentalist groups, they believe that every area of your life is religious. Like there's not your life and then you have your church over here. It's like everything you do is somehow colored by, God is supposed to be a part of everything you do. So, I had similar experiences in high school. They brought in creation scientists to show us, of course, only tell us one side. We weren't taught evolution at all, like not at all. And it was very, very patriarchal. There was, most of my teachers were male. Female teachers were doing like English and things like that. And so it was beyond just education. It was also, so like for myself as a female who's always like, I have management characteristics, I'm a leadership qualities, they didn't not know what to do with me. So like when in high school, we had like the standard class officers. And as a freshman, I was like, well, I want to be the class president. This sounds like fun. And so I ran for class president and I won. And they didn't know what to do because they'd never had a girl who was the class president. And so there was like this, oh my God, what do we do? And so I got called into the principal's office and he sat me down and he said, well, really, it should be one of the guys. But we do recognize that no one in your class is really qualified, so we'll let you be the class president. And I was like, oh, thanks.
For university, we had, the religious influence was everywhere. My campus had a chapel on the grounds, and we had to attend twice weekly for, I think it was about 45 minutes of, It's actually kind of like Oasis. You have the musician, except they're playing worship songs, and then you have a speaker who covered all kinds of subjects from a Christian or Nazarene perspective, including, like others mentioned, we had people who were converted homosexuals that came back to being straight, and they try and tell us how they did it, and a lot of it seemed kind of like a big ruse. But aside from the 2 mandatory chapels that we had to take, each year I took, where there were 4 Christian electives we had to take. One of them was very much like an introduction to Nazarene theology. For most people, it was stuff they'd heard all their lives in Sunday school, so this was kind of the class to just kind of kick back and sleep and not listen. But then the next year after that, I had to take New Testament. The year after that, Old Testament. And then the year after that, we took something called Christian Faith, which was a local pastor would come in as an adjunct and teach that and try and get you to come to a more solid conclusion about what you believed. And that was your senior level course. Most of all my classes, no matter what they were, whether it was economics, geology, the professors, they all had to sign a contract for their own statement of faith. And so because of that, they were all mostly very religious. Some were kind of mildly religious or wouldn't talk about it. But a lot of them, they would start each lecture with either a prayer or a devotional. In fact, I had a math professor where the first 15 minutes of class was just a devotional in some way. So it was there the whole time. We were never required to go to church on Sundays, but we had a church on campus too, so a lot of people did. I never went, but
I bet
yeah.
you're really good at Bible trivia.
Yeah, I am pretty good at Bible trivia. Try me.
Me too.
Let's hear from the real gay. I spent 4 years at that school as I became aware that I was a homosexual, and when I first resisted, I went to see the school counselor, who was a man named Dr. Leach, and he looked like a rat. And that's a true story. And when I inferred that I might have sexual leanings that weren't quite improved of, he told me that he was convinced that Jesus and a good Christian therapist could solve any problem I had. And I mentioned that Jesus considered miracles, so why did he need him? And that wasn't appreciated. I was always saying things that weren't appreciated. We had daily chapel. I'm sorry you had to go twice a week. We had daily chapel, but fun stories came out of it. My first encounter was I've been going to school about 3 weeks, and I got called by the dean of men, come in, there's some mistake, you're from this fine Christian family, I know your family, blah, blah, blah. They're saying you're not in chapel, and I'm sure this is wrong. And I said, no, it's right. I don't go to chapel. And he said, why? And this was the first sounding. I said, because you don't have a right to tell me when I'm supposed to worship God. And he told me, he pulled out the form that I had signed, and he said, I still have a right to tell you I have to go to daily chapel. So until my second semester, or as my sophomore year, I discovered that chapel checkers could be, because they didn't have, now they have cameras. Back then they were in an auditorium, and these checkers walked up and down with these charts, checking the empty seats. And by my sophomore year, I found that a chapel checker could be had for $25 a semester. Nice. So that took care of my chapel problems.
I have similar sort of chapel and devotional aspects to my experience as well. It's funny how when you get into middle and high school, how much of your sort of religious education as a group revolves around abstinence and the dangers of rock and roll. It's like, I was in 8th grade. It's like I had never heard the song "Stairway to Heaven," but I didn't know it was about that. But there was also a lot of. I remember very specifically in my American history class, we learned a lot of the fairy tale of American history, and things like manifest destiny and dominionism were not challenged at all. They were just sort of like, well, yeah, this is obvious. Like, God said we were going to take over America, and we did it. Go us. Viva America. But also, and that just was, I was not much of a history person academically then or now. So that just sort of like washed over me. I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. That's how that is. But I remember very vividly for a field trip we all went to Second Baptist, you know, that really mega church over on Voss. We went down there and we had a whole conference about dinosaurs in the Bible. And I kid you not, like this was about the time I was reaching the age of reason, and this is probably what drove me like down the road I went to of just like, yeah, this makes no sense. Like they could have just let that dog lie, and I probably would have been a good, yeah, I'm Christian, but whatever person my whole life. But when they got up there and was just like, the fossil record is a lie, and Satan is testing you through evidence, and Jesus rode a velociraptor. Like it's absolutely bonkers what they were telling us, and it went right to me to a point where it's like, yeah, this none of this makes sense. So yeah, that's probably where academically, like they could have just slipped it in any subject, but when they started messing with science and the logic of that is when the whole thing, that whole deck of cards just started tumbling down for me.
Can I add something? So the one thing I want to add to that is, you know, we laugh, and then at the same time, but as an adult, I worked as administrative assistant in a large Southern Baptist church here in Houston in the children's department. And they know, absolutely, statistically, it's a fact that if they don't get children to make a commitment to the church by the age of 12, their odds of keeping their children drops off dramatically every year after that, to the point of by the age of 18, if they haven't committed to the faith, they're probably never going to. And that is why they do this. They do it because they know that indoctrination happens before the age of 12. They talk about it freely, and that's why they do vacation Bible schools, so that's why they do Sunday schools, that's why they do religious schools, because they know that's when that's when you have to get them, because then it's kind of in your subconscious. So anyway.
All right, hey panel. The worst part about my year in Christian school was the quality of the teaching and the curriculum. And my question for you is, what was the quality of your teaching, and was there any kind of academic rigor in your schools?
I mean, I could say that in my first through fifth grade, it was basically glorified homeschooling. It was a very small school. The teachers were not certified in any way. I had an argument when I was in like fourth and fifth grade in the mid 70s, I had an argument with one of my teachers because our textbook was old for science, and the space part ended with Sputnik. And then there was a sentence that said, someday we're going to put men on the moon. So this was like 1975. And she said, and that's going to be so exciting. And I was like, we've been to the moon a couple of times already. And she was like, we have not. Because they were such a closed culture. They didn't have televisions. They didn't have radios. She apparently didn't read and did not know we'd been on the moon. And came back the next day and was like, oh my goodness, you're right. High school was a little better. Like, we actually had certified teachers. And so, again, my English was good. My math was good. Science got a little shaky.
We've got about 4 questions left. I'd love to get of all of them. Can we maybe just have a couple of panelists answer each one? Is that okay?
Sure.
Right.
Okay.
Lightning round. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. For me, it varied. My middle school years, I don't think that school was even accredited. The teaching was very subpar. Whenever I got to high school, it was a bit better. I wish I had brought it. I actually still have some of my Christian science textbooks. I'm holding up air quotes because they are very not science. But for some of your core subjects, like the skills of reading and math were very rigorous, but the content of things like history and science and the cultural zeitgeist of understanding of how things work were very skewed and left me a little out of touch whenever I transitioned to a public high school.
And I just wanted to glom on really quick. When it came to the rigor of the education, because I still keep in touch with a lot of my friends who I went to this school with, and it wasn't necessarily that we didn't learn math, we didn't learn English, we didn't, learn history. It was, we were never taught critical thinking. And I still have friends who, they're anti-vaxxers. They believe in homeopathy, and I really think that has something to do with they were never just taught the basic scientific method of discovery. So.
Good morning. Make sure can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. It's a very interesting panel. I went to a Church of Christ, the same type of Church of Christ school you went to, CB, although I was raised as a Methodist, for elementary and middle school, and then went to public school for high school. And, my own personal experience is very mixed, and I'm not going to get into how I look at religious education with a lot of gray. But I do remember, this is brought back a memory. I remember when I was in middle school, because the middle school I went to had both middle school and high school. I remember looking through the student manual, and it said that anybody who got either HIV, because this is back in the 80s, either in early 90s, anybody who got infected with HIV or who gotten pregnant were expelled. And I just wanted to know, the schools that y'all attended to, what were the policies of any female student who got pregnant while still during high school?
I can't answer the high school, but I know in the college realm, for students that did get pregnant, obviously the male did not really face any kind of discrimination. The females tended to have to do night classes, and they were given permission to live off campus, but I believe it was monitored. And yeah, I didn't think it was very appropriate at all, obviously.
I have to share a lot of myself on this one. I was in high school. I was in 11th and 12th grade. I was sexually active, and if it with another student at the school, and if it was discovered, both of us would have been expelled. And so I didn't really feel like when something went awry in that relationship and abusive behavior began to happen, I had no adult that I could go to and not get in trouble somehow. Obviously, my parents didn't want to hear it, his parents didn't want to hear it, and I didn't have a teacher I could tell because I would have risked expulsion.
I have to jump in with his story because my mother, I found out when I was 64 years old that I had a brother. I grew up an only child. And it turns that when she was 18, she became pregnant, the father unknown still, and that she was packed off to a farm until she had the baby. 2 days, when the baby was 2 days old, he was left on the back doorstep of an aunt and uncle's home with just a note saying, "Please take me in." It had been contrived before that they were going to raise the child because they were afraid if he was put up for adoption, non-Christians, i.e. non-Church of Christ, would get a hold of him and their eternal souls would be damned. See, they weren't worried about him. They were worried about their own souls. This is what I learned about these people. And as I said, I found out when I was 64, unfortunately he had died. I've since met his daughter and wife. And I was told by a family member that this was kept a secret because it was such a shame on the family. Now, this was in 1928, that someone who was a Christian in this fine Christian family would become pregnant. And I still ask them to this day, which is greater, becoming pregnant out of wedlock or telling a lie? Check your Bible. And, of course, nobody has anything to say.
So I spent all of my grade school at private school too, and I know how bad it can be sometimes, but I always think that they provided a really phenomenal literature education. Is there anything that you feel like you gained as opposed to your public school counterparts at your school, or did I just go to a really good one?
For my college, we were an accredited university, and I studied geology. And, there are many Christian schools, they're not accredited because they won't teach evolution, they won't teach the old age of the earth. My school did, and they got away with that because of the Nazarene doctrine. There's very much an umbrella over science where it says, as long as, God doesn't have any specific layout for natural science, but, if science can prove it, and it doesn't take God out of the equation, then it's okay. So, they would teach like a guided evolution, an old age of the earth that God intended to be like that. And of course, everything else was very much what you would get at a public school when it came to geology. But we knew that there were nearby colleges, and we'd see them at conferences where they were not accredited. Their students would argue with us about the age of the earth. But I'm really glad I got to see both that side and, of course, the science, because it really did help me kind of make these decisions. What is the church saying? What's the secular world saying? And of course, it helped me come over to the secular side, really, but still be able to understand where the religious side was coming from, so I could talk to them, without putting them down, but helping to see it the way I did.
This will be the last answer, and then unfortunately we have time. I think Jean had the mic up first. Sorry, I'll let Jean.
I can say that all in all, my high school experience in the school was, I felt like I got a good education, a decent education. The public schools in my area weren't all that great. So, I had great SAT scores, the smaller classes was probably a plus, and I was kind of the personality that I sort of thought